Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. Our guest speaker tonight is Everett Leisure, and he'll introduce his topic. He also has a Zoom room that he does once a month. So take it away, Everett.
Okay, thank you, Don. Yes, well, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again. I wish I could have come and joined you a few times, but it's been a wild ride for me. What can I say? Last time we talked about the long-term effects of the golden calf and the fact that a law was created as a result of that, which actually turns out to be a covenant. And traditional Christianity has latched on to the scriptures that talk about an old covenant, and they've connected that up with Exodus 20, which is the major covenant that everybody knows about at Sinai. And then since it's old, they throw the whole thing out, which is, to me, is a great misreading of what the scriptures actually say. And what I'd like to do is do a careful reading of the scriptures that are used and see if we can't identify what the old covenant really is, because I don't think those scriptures connect up with the Exodus 20, where the 10 Commandments is given. So to start off, I'd like to go to Hebrews 8. Let me share my screen here. Hebrews 8 is where Hebrews talks about the Old Covenant, mostly, is a place that talks mostly about the Old Covenant anyway. And so I'd like to go there and read what it has to say. Initially, as far as the introduction, to kind of get a feel for what we're dealing with here. So Hebrews 8 and verse 8, because finding fault with them, he says, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. And then down in verse 13, he explains what he's pulling from that bit of information that we just read. In that he says a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. Now, what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. So traditional Christianity says, well, see, the Sinai covenant is ready to vanish away. The 10 Commandments are no longer in force. But it says first covenant. It doesn't say Sinai covenant. And if you think about it, the first covenant mentioned is Noah's covenant. Well, it's obviously not talking about Noah's covenant, but is it talking about the Sinai covenant? Fortunately, we're given an explanation down in the next chapter, beginning in, or I suppose we'll start at verse 18, of what this first covenant looks like, a description of the first covenant, rather than just assuming it's the Sinai covenant. So in verse 18, therefore, not even the first covenant, you'll notice covenant is in italics, was dedicated without blood. So this first one was dedicated without blood. For when Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats, water, scarlet wool, and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, this is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you. Now, as I said, that's typically linked with Exodus 20, where we see the 10 Commandments. But it's actually confirmed, that covenant is confirmed in Exodus 24. But as far as the covenant goes, just as a summary of what is happening in the Sinai covenant, Exodus 20, the first 17 verses are a summary of the terms of that covenant. Verses 18 through 26 of chapter 20 is additional instruction and commentary. Then in chapter 21 through 23 are judgments. Judgment is a ruling based on prior law. So what it's telling us with the judgments is detail of how to implement various aspects of the summary 10 Commandments that might not be intuitively obvious. Those are the judgments. And then chapter 23, verse 20 through 33 are promises of help and expectations during the transition. These various sections are normal parts of covenants that were made in ancient times. It's not all the terms and conditions, if you will, not all the law of a particular covenant. So in Exodus 24, then we come to the confirmation of that covenant. And I'd like to read some of those details with having in mind what we just read about what happened when the first covenant was confirmed. So Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the communication that Moses had with God, revolving around this covenant, including the judgments. So basically we're talking about chapter 20 through 23 is what this is saying. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Eternal has said, we will do. And so Moses wrote the words of the Eternal, and he rose early in the morning, built an altar at the foot of the mountain, 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Eternal. Moses took half the blood, put it in basins, half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant, that's what he just written, and read in the hearing of all the people. And they said, all that the Eternal has said, we will do and be obedient. Then Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant which the Eternal has made with you according to all these words. So the terms and conditions and the introduction and the various other parts of that covenant are all contained in chapter 20 through 23, with the confirmation detailed in 24. Now, if you remember, when we read about the first covenant, Moses spoke every precept to all the people according to the law. Do those 3 chapters contain every precept according to the law? Is there anything in there about Levi? No. I wish I should have put an announcement to say, read all those chapters so you're familiar with it. But trust me, there's nothing in there about Levi. Well, isn't Levi sort of important for the law? There's nothing in there about sin offerings. Weren't sin offerings important for the law? There's nothing in there about really blessings and cursings. The closest thing to a curse is toward the end of chapter 23. It tells them that if they don't eliminate the current residents of the land when they go in, that they will be a snare to them. That's the closest thing I can find to a curse in that covenant that they just agreed to. So the other thing you may or may not have noticed is they sacrificed oxen. Now, I think it's really a young bull is what that means. But in Hebrews, it says Moses took the blood of calves and goats. Doesn't say anything about that here. So right offhand, we have a mismatch that what the Hebrews described doesn't really fit what this is saying. Now, as it turns out, going back to Hebrews, chapter 9, and continuing on, verse 21, then likewise he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry. Did we read about that in Exodus 20? Well, no, don't think we did. Actually, the plans for the tabernacle hadn't even been given to Moses yet. So how could he sprinkle with blood at the first covenant, as it's described here in Hebrews? That doesn't match up with what happened at Sinai. Now, some people say, well, what he did this sprinkling of the blood of the tabernacle when it was confirmed, or when it was sanctified in Leviticus 9. Well, if you read Leviticus 9, he anointed the tabernacle with oil. He did put blood on the altar, but everything else was anointed with oil. And it says here in verse 21, he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry. Actually, the Greek text contains a definite article along with blood. So he sprinkled with the blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry. So he's using the same blood to purify, if you will, the tabernacle, as he used to sprinkle on the people. Well, that's not going to work if 9 months later is when he did the tabernacle. That blood would not be in a position to be sprinkled, much of anywhere, flicked off maybe, but I wouldn't call that sprinkled. So all in all, it seems that we don't have a good match here at all. Now, there's another, it also says, which God has commanded you. The covenant Sinai wasn't really commanded to Israel. The terms were set before them in at least summary form 3 times, and they were given the option to ask questions and get clarification. There's no sense that I see that God is saying, this is it, love it or lump it. You're stuck with this. This is all we're going to do. There's no sense of that in the Sinai covenant either. So what other choice do we have if it doesn't fit what happened in Exodus 20. Well, as it turns out, in Deuteronomy, at the end of Deuteronomy, it's sort of summarizing what's going on here. And it says, these are the words of the covenant which Eternal commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them at Horeb. Now, one covenant besides another covenant, to me, means two covenants. We're told it's all the same thing. But we'll see, and I think I communicated last time around that it's really different than what happened at Sinai. We're told they're the same thing, but there are many things that are different. Obviously, God has not changed significantly. He still expects his original instruction and the original covenant to be respected. But this is establishing a different set of rules for how Israel is to function. Down in verse 9 here. Therefore, keep the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all that you do. In verse 12, that you may enter into covenant with the Eternal your God and into his oath, which the Eternal your God makes with you today, that he may establish you today as a people for himself. At the golden calf, God sent Moses down the mountain and said, your people that you brought out of Egypt have corrupted themselves. Get out of my way, and I'm thinking seriously about destroying them. In effect, they were disowned at that particular point in time, and they're not becoming his people again until this day, when this covenant was confirmed. They were put under Moses' responsibility. He was supposed to carry them like a mother, carries her child, and it started weighing on him rather heavily. And verse 14, I make this covenant and this oath, not with you alone, but with him who stands here with us today before Eternal our God, as well as him who is not with us today. So this is not his covenant. His covenant was done at Sinai. This is this covenant. 12, I'm sure this will be familiar to you. And the Eternal spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, saw no form, you only heard a voice. So he declared to you his covenant. That's what happened in Exodus 20, which he commanded you to perform, the 10 commandments. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. So his covenant was the 10 commandments, is the 10 commandments. This covenant, as it turns out, records the 10 commandments, but they aren't really part of the terms and conditions of the covenant. They're listed in the introduction. The first 11 chapters sort of explain to us all the trials and tribulations of Israel, what they went through, basically from the time the Sinai covenant was given until this time, which explained, or should explain, why they needed another covenant. The first one basically was not applied to them. They proved themselves incapable of living up to the expectation. So what is this Deuteronomy covenant all about? And if we go to Deuteronomy chapter 1, in the very beginning, it sort of summarizes what is going on here with Deuteronomy. It's presented as a speech to Israel. We'll see with according to all that the Eternal had given him as commandments to them. Verse 1, these are the words. Whoops. Come on. These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel this side of the Jordan in the wilderness, in the plain opposite Suf, between Paran, Tophel, Laban, Hazarah. It came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Eternal had given him as commandments to them. Now, did I cut out during any of that time? My machine was being cantankerous. And the other question is, does that sound familiar? Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Eternal had given him as commandments to them. Does that maybe sound like every precept of the law that Hebrews is talking about? When Hebrews 1 said Moses spoke unto all Israel every precept according to the law. Well, that's what Moses is giving to Israel here at this particular point in time. He's giving him a summary, giving them a summary of everything, every command, or generally speaking, major command that he had given to them while they were wandering in the wilderness. And verse 5, on this side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses began to explain this law, saying, this is new instruction that he's given to all Israel. They undoubtedly received bits and pieces of it while they were wandering in the wilderness, but here he's summarizing for him. And at the end, we read that though the Deuteronomy, these are the words of the covenant, besides the covenant at Horeb, at Sinai, that he made at that particular point in time. One of the major differences between these covenants is this covenant establishes Levi. Now, the tabernacle had been in place for quite some time, but Moses was the connection between God and Israel. It was not the high priest until this time, as it turns out. With Moses, it was directing all aspects of what Israel was doing. They were not under the direct authority of Aaron at this point in time. So what are some other things that we need to understand about this covenant? If we go to chapter 12, Moses tells Israel to break down the altars and the objects of worship in the land of Canaan when they go in there. You shall not worship Eternal your God with such things, but you shall seek the place where Eternal your God chooses out of all your tribes to put his name for his dwelling place. And there you shall go. You shall take your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, etc., and you shall go there. And verse 8, he tells us, you shall not do as we are doing here today, every man doing whatever is right in his own eyes. For as yet you've not come to the rest and inheritance, which eternal your God is giving you. When you cross over the Jordan and dwell in the land, changes are coming. The land which eternal your God is giving you to inherit, he gives you rest from all your enemies. Verse 11, then there will be the place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide. There you shall bring all that I command you, burnt offerings, sacrifices, tithes, heave offerings of your hand, your choice offerings, which you shall vow from the Lord. Was any of that stuff in the Sinai covenant? Any requirement to go to the place? Any requirement to take care of the Levites? Go to the Levite for counsel and advice? No, don't think so. Now, as it turns out, there's a physical relationship between these two covenants that is described in towards the end, obviously, of Deuteronomy. In verse 24, so it was when Moses had completed writing the words of this law in a book, when they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, take this book of the law and put it beside the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there as a witness against you. So this covenant was set next to the ark of his covenant. His covenant, the Ten Commandments, was in the ark of his covenant. How about that? Huh? But this was set outside. So we had one inside, his covenant, and we had one outside. This covenant was not his covenant. Now, as it turns out, this requires this covenant requires or expects the obedience to his covenant as well, and it mentions that in a few places, but it's adding additional instruction. And what it's really doing is it's putting a separation between God and Israel, namely the Levites. After the golden calf, they proved themselves incapable of doing what he expected of them. And so he came and, they built the tabernacle, and he came down to dwell in that tabernacle, but he put the Levites in between him and all the rest of the tribes. Well, I think last time around we went over the altar that was expected at Sinai. Maybe we'll go there again if we have time. But in the meantime, let's go to chapter 18 and verse 1. The priests, the Levites, all the tribe of Levi shall have no part nor inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings of eternal made by fire. Verse 5, for the eternal your God has chosen him out of all your tribes to stand a minister in the name of eternal, him and his sons forever. Now, the purpose of the Sinai covenant was so that the whole nation would be a nation of priests. Exodus 19 says, if you obey my covenant, I will make you will be my special people, a holy nation, and priests of mine. But this is saying, no, we're not going to do that. Levi is going to be my priest. And the rest of you are going to have to keep your distance. You know, Levi separated them from the eternal. He wasn't bringing them closer together, which was sort of which I would consider a step backward. Now, just to reinforce what we're talking about here in Deuteronomy 32, verse 46, and he said to them, "Set your hearts on all the words which I testify among you today, which you shall command your children to be careful to observe. All the words of this law." This is not his law, but it's this law. It's important. It expected his law to be observed, but Levi is not fundamentally part of God's plan for mankind. Abraham got along fine without the Levitical priesthood separating, or being a go-between of him and the rest of Israel. Him and Abraham, so he's focusing on this particular law that he's setting before him that day. Now, as it turns out, this is at the very end, obviously, of Deuteronomy. And verse 48 then says, "The Lord spoke to Moses that very same day, saying, go up this mountain of the Abarim, Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, across from Jericho, you the land of Canaan, which I give to the children of Israel as a possession, and die on the mountain which you ascend, and be gathered to your people, just as Aaron your brother died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people." So once this covenant was confirmed, Moses was basically taken out of the line of authority, because this covenant required that the high priest would be God's representative on earth, not Moses. Moses was not the high priest. And so he's taken out of the line of authority because if he had been there, well, I mean, the stated reason is that he spoke or struck the rock instead of speaking, and that's undoubtedly valid. But I suspect that this had a part in it as well, that if Moses had continued hanging around, there might have been some second guessing of what the high priest was going to be doing. And that would not have been, a good thing according to the covenant. So as it turns out, Moses did what he was told. In chapter 34, verse 1, Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is across from Jericho, and the Eternal showed him all the land as far as Dan, all Naphtali, land of Ephraim, Manasseh, Judah, as far as the western sea. And verse 4, he said to him, "This is the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have caused you to see it with your eyes. You shall not cross over there." So Moses, the servant of Eternal, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of Eternal. So that allowed this covenant to go into effect and continue. The purpose of this covenant, to summarize, just to make sure everything's clear here. "Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live and go in and possess the land which the Eternal God of your fathers is giving you." Was there a chance that they might not have lived? Well, yes. As it turns out, Moses had to beg and plead for their life. At least on one occasion, specifically for that purpose, he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, we're told in Deuteronomy 29, or Deuteronomy 9, rather. So it was a very real possibility. This separated them from God, but put the Levites in charge, who had a better grasp of evidently of what God expected. If you remember at the golden calf in Exodus 32, verse 26, Moses stood at the entrance of the camp and said, "Whoever is on the eternal side, come to me." And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. And he said, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let every man put on his sword and his side, go in and out from the entrance to entrance throughout the camp, kill every man his brother, every man his companion, and his neighbor." So I presume that those were the ringleaders that they were specifically searching out for, those who had promoted the golden calf. And then Moses said, "Consecrate yourselves today to the eternal, that he may bestow on you a blessing this day, for every man has opposed his brother and his son." I suspect that blessing was the priesthood that Aaron received. That, doesn't say that anywhere, but that certainly would fit. They didn't get it that particular day. This particular day, they were volunteers. Now, it seems that when the plans for the tabernacle were given, that Levi was included. But those plans are out of order. If those plans were in order, the priesthood would have been the firstborn, because the firstborn were still the priests at that time. They were sanctified when Israel was in Egypt, right, or as they left, they were set apart, and then they were exchanged with Levi at the beginning of the second year, or probably the second month of the second year that they were in the wilderness. So that period of time, the firstborn would have been the priest until Aaron was consecrated the very first month of the second year, and then the Levites added later. Now, I referred to this earlier, but we'll just read it here now. This is the purpose of the Sinai covenant. "Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice," this is Exodus 19, verse 5, "obey my voice, keep my covenant, you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." So that's what was intended by the Sinai covenant. But after the golden calf, that wasn't, Israel proved themselves incapable of living to the expectation. Levi did a little better, and were given the responsibility of teachers, teaching Israel as part of the Deuteronomy covenant. Back to Deuteronomy, we find that in chapter 17 and verse 8. "If a matter arises which is too hard for you to judge, between degrees of guilt or bloodshed, between one judgment or another, between one punishment or another, matters of controversy within your gates, you shall rise and go up to the place which eternal your God chooses, and you shall come to the priests, the Levites, to the judge there in those days, inquire of them, they shall pronounce upon you the sentence of judgment. You shall do according to the sentence which they pronounce upon you in that place which Eternal chooses. You shall be careful to do according to all that they order you. This is establishing that system. That's what Deuteronomy does. And it was not a system that was established at Sinai. The hope was that everyone would directly seek their Creator for them by themselves and be diligent to do their part to uphold that covenant. But obviously that wasn't going to work. Now, there are some scriptures that we haven't read carefully that people usually talk about the Sinai covenant. But if we read them carefully, I think we'll find they do not. We read this before, because finding fault with them, he says, behold, days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Judah, or the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, and I disregarded them, says the Lord. Now it says, a covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. Where were they at that time? Well, if he took them by the hand to lead them out of a room, wouldn't they be in the room? But since he took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, wouldn't they have needed to be in Egypt? Was there a covenant made in Egypt? Well, that would fit if it were the case. In Exodus 16 and verse 1, this is, of course, before they got to Sinai, shortly after they left Egypt. They journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt. So they departed from the land of Egypt already. They hadn't even made a Sinai covenant yet. Well, as it turns out, Joshua has a little bit of a different perspective in this particular case. This is after they get into the promised land. At that time, Eternal said to Joshua, make flint knives for yourselves and circumcise the sons of Israel a second time. This is the reason why, verse 4. Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war had died in the wilderness on the way. Joshua circumcised them because all the people who came out of Egypt had died in the wilderness on the way after they'd come out. All the people who had all the people who came out had been circumcised, and all the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. So Joshua's perspective here is that the whole time they were wandering in the wilderness, they were in Egypt. Sort of a mental Egypt, I suspect. And I think the record that you're familiar with bears witness to that they wanted to go back on numerous occasions. And they yearned for the leeks and the onions and all the good things that they had in the land of Egypt. And so here we're circumcising Israel again. Just as they just crossed over the Jordan, if I remember correctly. So it was when they'd finished circumcising all the people that they stayed in their places in the camp till they were healed. Then Eternal said to Joshua, "This day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." That day he removed the shame of Egypt, that their yearning to go back was removed from them. So it was this time that he was taking them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt. Well, what did they do just before they crossed over? They crossed over in the 41st year, in the first month. And the Deuteronomy covenant was made in the 40th year, the 11th month. So just before they crossed over, he took them by the hand and led them across. And he made that covenant, which was the Deuteronomy covenant at that particular point in time, when he took them by the hand again. Remember, they were Moses' people up until the confirmation of that covenant. So he took them by the hand to lead them out of mental Egypt, is what it's talking about in Hebrews chapter 8. And just reinforce this a little bit again. 27 verse 1. Again, this is towards the end of the covenant, really after the terms and conditions. This is getting into the blessings and cursings part of the covenant and that sort of thing. Now Moses with the elders of Israel, verse 1 of chapter 27, commanded the people, saying, "Keep all the commandments which I command you today. And it shall be on the day when you cross over the Jordan to the land which the eternal your God is giving you, that you shall set up for yourselves large stones, whitewash them with lime. You shall write on them all the words of this law when you've crossed over, that you may enter the land which eternal your God is giving you." Now, the introduction to Deuteronomy, I mentioned earlier, the account of their adventures in the wilderness, ended about chapter 12. And that's where he told them that he would commit to dwelling in the tabernacle, and that they should then go to the tabernacle and bring their tithes and offerings to that place, that single place, as opposed to the altar of earth or stone that was expected with the Sinai covenant. It was being done differently at that particular point in time. So chapter 12 began the terms and conditions of the covenant. And it basically goes through the middle of chapter 26. They're told then to write the words of this law on the stones when they go into the promised land. Now, there's another verse in Malachi 4 that is often misunderstood as well, and understandably so. "Remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel with the statutes and judgments." Well, the instruction for the Deuteronomy covenant was given in Horeb. The great bulk of it was given in Deuteronomy, or in Exodus 34, When Moses came down the mountain with the replacement set of tablets, verse 32, afterward all the children of Israel came near, and he gave them as commandments all that Eternal had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. So the great bulk of what he received was given there, and there are various places. Exodus 7, at the end of the chapter, tells that on Mount Sinai, they were required to do their regular, their continual burnt offerings and sacrifices. Leviticus 26 lists out the curses, the blessings and the curses. It's kind of a forewarning of what's going to happen in Deuteronomy 28 when the covenant becomes official. That they're being warned not to obey, or they will be, dealt with very, very harshly. And of course, there again, that's repeated in Deuteronomy 28 when the covenant became official. Actually, additional instruction was given as well throughout Israel's station in Sinai when they were still there. Verse 34, but whenever Moses went in before the Eternal to speak with him, this is at Moses' tent that he set far outside the camp. He would take the veil off until he came out, and he would come out and speak to the children of Israel whatever he had been commanded. So additional instruction was given down the mountain as well as up in the mountain in the general area of Sinai, Mount Horeb. Now I just might remind us of what happened in Exodus 33. This is when Moses came down after when he broke the tablet, shortly after he broke the tablets. So Moses pitched his tent, took his tent, pitched it outside the camp, far from the camp, and called it the tabernacle meeting. And it came to pass that everyone who sought Eternal went out to the tabernacle meeting, which was outside the camp. So this was a new thing at that particular point in time. Moses had been able to cry out from wherever he happened to be, and God would hear. But now even Moses had to go outside the camp because God separated himself from Israel at that time. Now we think the tabernacle is a step up because he again dwelt with Israel, but it didn't restore the kind of relationship that was had before the golden calf, when Moses could just cry out wherever he happened to be, and God would be there. So that it's a step up from the tent far outside the camp, that is the tabernacle is, but it's a step down from his original relationship with them, with the being in and around the camp. So is there any indication, well, there is plenty of indication of why Deuteronomy might be called obsolete. Can we go to the tabernacle? Do we consult with the Levites in order to know how to conduct ourselves? By and large, the covenant of Deuteronomy was made for Israel in the promised land. Chapter 12 of Deuteronomy, verse 1. These are the statutes and judgments which you shall be careful to observe in the land which Eternal your God, God of your fathers, is giving you to possess all the days that you live on earth. Deuteronomy 16, I'm sure you all know, it requires that they go to the place 3 times a year. Well, if somebody living in Babylon went to the place every time one of the festivals occurred, 3 times a year, they would be spending their entire life going back and forth to Babylon. That's obviously not what God intended. But these are specifically for Israel in the Promised Land. Now, is there any other indication that this might not be a permanent solution to a human problem? And verse 15, Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet, chapter 18, verse 15 of Deuteronomy. Like me, from your midst, from your brethren, him shall you hear. And verse 18 pretty much repeats this. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and he will put my words, or I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And it shall be that whoever will not hear my words, which he speaks in my name, I will require of him. That once this prophet starts speaking in the name of Yah, his word is authoritative. His word is superior. So this law would not be authoritative forever. Messiah would come, the prophet, and explain, enhance, be an example of the covenant that Yah will ultimately make with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Now, if we go back to Hebrews, there are some other things that we've usually glossed over. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 11. Therefore, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law. Now, as it turns out, the Greek word for that is used in place of under here is epi. It actually means upon, like an epicenter, upon center. That the priesthood was hung on the Levites. And if perfection were through that priesthood, there was no other need for there to be any other law made. What further need was there that another priest should arise according to the order of Melchizedek and not be called according to the order of Aaron? So why do we have a high priest that isn't a descendant of Aaron? Verse 12. For the priesthood being changed, of necessity, there's also a change of the law. Now, as it turns out, in the original Greek, the definite article is not used in this particular case. So it's not talking about the law. It's talking about a wholesale change of law. We have a different law. Israel related differently under the Deuteronomy covenant to God than they would have if they'd obeyed the Sinai covenant. Sinai, if they called on him with an offering or an animal sacrifice, he promised to come to them. But with Levi, they had to go to him. Let's read that. Exodus 20. Verse 24. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice it on it your burnt offerings, your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you and bless you. Basically, in every place where his name is accurately, used, he will come to them and bless them. Well, that would work out real handy if I were an Israelite and happened to be in another nation and sharing about my God with other people. And they said, hey, that sounds like a good deal. How do we get in on that? He could make a sacrifice, call upon God, and he would come to them no matter where he was. That's not how it worked with Levi. Even Israel had to go to him. A totally different relationship was being established. Now, as it turns out, I think it's 1 Peter 2:9. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. This is exactly what God was trying to do with ancient Israel. He's trying to make them a holy nation, a special people. This is what he's trying to do with us. It seems to me we need to understand the difference between his original instruction and what he gave to Israel actually because of transgressions. Namely, the golden calf was the straw that broke the camel's back. So he's trying to establish us, believers today, as a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people. So it stands to reason that we would know, understand, and respect the original instruction and examine it very carefully. There's some deep stuff in there. You have to think about it for a while. There are some commands that are really more all-encompassing than some of the detailed instruction we get out of Deuteronomy. So I hope that is food for thought, if nothing else, and has been worthwhile for you. And I'm open to comments, questions, observations, or anything pertinent to the subject.
Okay, at this time, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand. Galen.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm so blessed to have heard this understanding, because I never realized that there were those differences. And it just amazes me how we can learn so much going back to these topics. I'm glad I heard this portion, and I do know about the I think that's also in Peter, what you said about the priests, that we are now the priests and the kings, and we just have to stand on it. That's our identity that we need to brainwash ourselves, because that's what we forget most of the time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So in one place it said, and these were the laws that were added to because of iniquity or sin. Now it puzzles me, which ones is he talking about?
I don't remember that quote exactly. Deuteronomy 12 says, these are the statutes and judgments which you shall observe in the land. Deuteronomy 4, verse 1 says something that is similar to that. It's Galatians 3:19 that is often quoted, and it says, for what purpose then serves the law? It was added because of transgressions. Of course, most people think that's the 10 Commandments, but they weren't added. The Deuteronomy covenant was added. Moses wrote the words, Deuteronomy 31:24, and he gave the book to the Levites, and they set it next to the Ark of his covenant. So it was there with his covenant. It was added in that sense of the word, but it was not put in the Ark of his covenant. It was not his covenant. It was set outside.
Thank you.
Gary?
Yes, thank you, Everett. Excellent presentation, I think.
you.
You mentioned the Galatians 19. In Galatians 3:10, it mentions the law that Paul is talking about. It calls it the book of the law, and that was the law that was placed beside the ark. So it wasn't talking about his covenant or his law. It was talking about that book of the law that was placed beside the ark. At least that seems to what it's indicating there. Also, just to add to 1 Peter 2:9, there's a scripture in Revelation 5:10 where it says, the ultimate goal is to make us kings and priests. And we've been cleansed by the blood of the Lamb. I'm done for now. Thank you again, Everett.
Thank you, and you're welcome. I appreciate your comments.
Tim?
Yeah, Everett, I think I've discussed this with you before, but I want to make sure I'm on the same page here. The Sinai covenant, which is the covenant that God broke with his own finger on stone, is inside the ark of the covenant, which is his covenant. And then the Deuteronomy covenant is the one that Moses wrote with his hand that God commanded him to, but he wrote it with his hand. It's on the outside of the ark, which is God's covenant. And but everything that Paul and the New Testament talks about, the law fading away and doing away, is the law of Moses, not the law of God. Is the law of Moses that is fading away. And that's where, and then the Protestant churches or mainstream Christianity, should I say, has got it confused. They don't understand that there's two different covenants there, and then they just think the whole law, and they throw the 10 Commandments in there. And where Christ's covenant, God's covenant is forever, and the Moses covenant fades away, and the new covenant takes over. That's what Christ is doing with the new covenant, because he's writing those laws, which is the one that God wrote with his finger. He's writing them on our hearts and in our minds in the new covenant. Is that about the same way you're thinking?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That there are a couple of scriptures, Isaiah 42 verse 6 and 49 verse 8, that talk about Messiah, and they say, I will give him as a covenant. The new covenant terms are not clearly specified, but John 14 verse 6 is Yeshua speaking, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. Well, it's his example that we need to look to on top of the original instruction, and the law is important too. There's lots of good stuff in there. It's probably all good stuff, but there's obviously some of it that doesn't apply. The Levites don't, there's that system for Israel in the promised land doesn't work for us in the US of A, to say the least. Yeah.
All right, let me say this then. when we take the bread and the wine for Passover, we're actually establishing that new, well, he established it, but we're putting in remembrance of that covenant that he's writing in our hearts and in our minds. That is actually the new covenant that he's talking about, right?
I believe so. Yeah, you can have a debate on that, but yeah, that we are renewing that covenant, reminding ourselves of that covenant, and honoring him in his death. That's at the cross. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Gary?
Yeah, another thing I think is interesting in Israel, when they were at Sinai, it was a marriage covenant, and they agreed to the terms of the covenant twice. They said, whatever the Eternal says, we will do. And after they sinned with a golden calf, and Moses stood in the gap to keep the Eternal from wiping them out completely and starting over with Moses, and he added that covenant that was placed beside the ark, that was imposed on them. They didn't agree to it. It was either that or death. So it was just imposed on them. I think it mentions that in the book of Hebrews. Where is it?
Yeah, Hebrews 9, or yeah, it says he commanded them, and yeah,
Right.
that is reflected in some of the wording in Deuteronomy as well. It was this is it, folks. Take it or leave it.
Right. So Moses really saved their hides, if you will, by standing in the gap. I'm done.
Bill?
That was an interesting point, Jerry. Would you repeat that? That was very interesting.
Everett could probably do it better than I did, but yes, they agreed to his covenant at Sinai in two different places. They said everything that the Eternal has said we will do, basically becoming he's their husband and they were his bride. And then when they sinned with the golden calf, they didn't really have a choice. The wedding covenant had been broken, and the book of the law, or the Moab covenant that was placed beside the ark, was imposed on them. It wasn't agreed to by them. It was either that or death.
There's no specific record of them agreeing to it. Moses tells them in at least one place anyway that this is what you've agreed to today. We assume, I mean, we could assume that there was some sort of agreement, but it was commanded as well. Moses was commanded to tell them, and Israel was commanded to adhere. So yeah, it was not non-negotiable at that particular point in time. I might read that here while. Okay, well, we have hands up, so I'll wait.
Bill?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Everett. I heard you give that a couple years ago with that other Zoom group. I can't remember the fellow that died. Appreciate it. And I had not focused on the fact that Moses moved himself out away from the camp. That's an interesting point. Wow, good point. I'm done.
Igor?
Yeah, Everett, I'm more like Tim Robertson, having heard you for so many years. So probably I will raise same questions, which I probably raised it in the past. I want to share my screen with the whiteboard and just recap what you just mentioned. So are you able to see my screen?
I think
Yeah.
so. Somebody's.
Okay, that's mine. So you have Mount Sinai. So here Moses went up and spoke to God and brought down 2 tablets of stone. And then he also has a scroll, 2 tablets of stone, Decalogue, and then you have the other laws written with ink, and these are written on stone. And then people, like you have 70 elders of Israel, and then you have Moses and Aaron, and then all the children of Israel. And then you have, how do you say, VH, Yahweh. So between Yahweh and the children of Israel, this covenant is entered, and this is mountain Sinai. So is this Sinai covenant? Do you think this is Sinai covenant? What Protestants would refer to?
Well, Moses brought down 2 tablets of stone. Of course, he
Okay.
broke them when he got down at
Yeah.
the bottom.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that
Book of
nail.
ordinances. This is ordinances
um,
written with ink in a scroll.
That happened. Well, probably that happened when he got the replacement set of tablets. He wrote the judgments while before the confirmation, before he went up the mountain. But
Okay.
the ordinances, if you will, the lesser divisions, I don't see any record of that until after he came down with the replacement set of tablets.
Okay, let's call this as Sinai 1. Then you can also have Sinai 2 as you are proposing.
Yeah.
So Sinai 2 is here, and then you have Horeb, where you are proposing Deuteronomy terms and conditions.
Yeah, the bulk of them were given before they left Sinai. It would have been that first year.
Okay, this is third covenant. So this is Deuteronomy, which chapter 16 or?
Well, the whole book of Deuteronomy
Okay.
is basically a covenant. I
Okay.
don't know that it's the third covenant. I don't know where
So,
you get that.
okay, when we are coming to book of Hebrews, it says something is taken away in order to establish new. So when he says old is taken away and he established new.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
what
old
was
refers
taken-
to what here?
I missed that. Sorry.
He taketh away old in order to establish new,
Yes.
or whatever, some covenant is taken up, right? According to book of Hebrews.
Yes.
So this old refers to which? The Sinai 1 or Sinai 2 or Horeb?
The only working covenant that Israel had was the one that they made with the book of Deuteronomy.
So you are coming here, this is there. And this is probably gone. So something has to be gone, right? So,
Well, it's talking about the effectiveness or the efficacy of a covenant. Traditional Christianity has wrapped a lot of baggage along with this stuff, and that's part of the problem. Is something you say something is gone? Well, the God's commitment to follow through on the Sinai covenant with Israel is gone. That doesn't mean that he has thrown away the 10 Commandments.
I can take side of Protestants for tonight and defend them for the sake of argument. So you're saying when they say Sinai covenant that is gone, they're thinking whole of this is gone, right? Which you are refuting. You're
That's
saying,
what traditional Christianity would, that's my impression of their
Yeah.
understanding, yes.
yeah. So when we Protestants, when we say Sinai is done, it is much broader way Protestants use. They don't say go to one mountain, whatever happened around this mountain, but you have freedom to stick with your exactness, throwing away all metaphors, broader statements, just throw them away, just go stick to the facts. Let us do narrow interpretation. So whatever has happened at Sinai, still this is there or this is not there. That is my question. Or this is there or this is not there. Which one is taken out? Some covenant has to be taken out, right? According to Hebrews.
The agreement that bound God to protect Israel and to bless them is not, it is trashed, is done.
Which chapters? At least tell me chapters.
Well, let's do this. Let's go to Deuteronomy 26
Okay.
and verse 16. This
So-
again is towards the end of
Okay, let's go to Deuteronomy 26.
verse 16.
Verse 16. Okay.
This day, the eternal your God commands you to observe these statutes and judgments. Therefore, you shall be careful to observe them with all your heart, with all your soul.
Okay.
So what Moses put before them that day, they are to observe. Today you have proclaimed eternal to be your God, and you will
Mhm.
walk in his ways, keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and that you obey his voice.
Okay.
That is the instruction that they had out of Sinai.
Okay.
So
So
they are still to obey the instruction, even though God does not bind himself to the promises he made as part of that covenant.
So this is staying. This is not taken away. That's what you are saying.
Right.
Okay. At least like we have some clarity here. So Deuteronomy 16 is staying.
Yes. Well, that,
26:16. Okay.
yeah. That's also reflected, although not quite as clearly, in chapter 4 that we read in verse 1. Listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live and go in and possess the land which eternal God of your fathers is giving you. You shall not add to the word which I command or take away from it, that you may keep the commandments of the eternal your God, which I command you. And that's
That is which chapter, which verse?
chapter 4, verse 2.
Okay, let's open another window.
That is referring back to his original commandments, which are the 10 commandments.
Okay, so for the clarity's sake, so the 10 commandments are part of this Deuteronomy 26:16.
Yes.
Okay, so
Well, 17.
16 and 17. Okay,
Yeah.
so this you believe today is still that covenant is standing.
No, this covenant is not standing anymore. This is what is Hebrews refers to as the first covenant.
Okay, now I'm corrected again. My impression was this is what is retained. This is taken out. So Deuteronomy 16, 26 verse 16 and 17, that is taken out. Okay. Let's go back to our diagram. Sorry, I'm taking a little bit longer time for my clarity. So Deuteronomy 26, 16 to 17 is actually taken away. This is referring to this. Because I'm going to do some research and get back to you.
Again, it's the covenant. It says nothing about any particular expectation of the covenant, but the covenant, the agreement that you do this and I'll do this is what is being kicked to the curb, if you will, which is one reason why I explained just very briefly what Hebrews is talking about when it says new covenant. If you will enter into life, keep the commandments. It's very important. You know, he is writing his law in our heart, not the law of Moses in our heart.
Okay.
And it is, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. It is his life, example, and teaching that are the basis for the expectation of how we live when we say that we abide in him.
Okay, so now you are going in the direction of Hebrews. So Hebrews' main thrust is to bring us to new covenant, but you used in a reverse direction to invalidate or validate some of the old covenant components. So, okay, at least I understand this portion. You said like 26 verses 16 to 17 are gone. So remaining are probably they're up, if I understand correctly.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you understand, but
Okay, we
it's
as
the-
Protestants,
yeah,
so
we need to remember it's the covenant, it's the agreement that
correct.
it's talking about here. It's not talking about any particular expectation that is included in what was the terms and conditions of those covenants. That we need to think about, to ponder carefully based on I think the original instruction as well as the life and teaching of Yeshua.
Okay. Now we have to come back to the definitions of covenant. There are no expectations outside of a covenant. Any expectations from God is always via some covenantal agreement that is agreed upon both the parties, and there should be blood that should be used to ratify and seal the terms and conditions. You have parties to the covenant, and you have blessings or benefits, and you have penalties for violations. So that is the basic structure of a covenant. And that's a debatable. God has any expectations outside of a covenant. So we have to somehow tie up these expectations to a particular covenant. And it seems, I might have misunderstood. That's why I went through this diagram. It seems to me, at least that's what I thought after hearing your presentation, there are some portions of the covenants. Some covenants are still valid today. Some are taken out. Protestants mistakenly, I call it as Sinai covenant. So that's what you are refuting. So is it a battle for the word? Are they using the wrong word, Sinai? Is that what you are refuting?
Well, they call it the Sinai covenant. They call it the Mosaic covenant.
Yeah.
They call it a number of things.
Old covenant.
They call it the old covenant. Yeah. And in the use of many terms, it's totally confusing when you get down to it.
Okay.
And the Sinai covenant as well was written to the nation of Israel. it requires them to execute the sorceress. Well, I don't think that's our responsibility to go executing sorceresses. It was written for a nation who had judicial authority, and we don't have judicial authority. So we have to examine the terms of those covenants based on our circumstances and on the example of Yeshua, as I said.
Okay, helps. But your conclusion is we should all be coming to new covenant, right?
Well, yeah. But it's mainly based on what happened at Sinai.
That's true. There's a shadow and reality relationship, I believe. But the terms and conditions of the new covenant are the examples, teachings of Jesus Christ, right?
That's the way I see it. Yeah.
Then we are in more agreement than disagreement. Thank you. I'll let others questions be taken note. Sorry, I took a little bit longer time. Thank you, Everett.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Crystal's iPad?
Big distinction I see is the Levitical priesthood, because that's the contextual framing in the book of Hebrews. It's temporary and permanent. The temporary was the tent in the building. And when it says the old is waxing and will soon vanish, I take that to mean the temple in Jerusalem, which is going to get sacked in 70 AD. And along with it goes all the temple ordinances and all the rites, and everything becomes dormant. It's kind of like if there's a law that says if you have a horse and it poops downtown and you don't clean it up, you get a fine. Well, I don't have a horse, and so that law may be still on the books, but it's dormant. It can't apply to me. So, and it talks about, and therefore we have a new high priest. It's talking about that in the context of the old and new covenant. So you've got to remember that the Levitical priesthood was not what he wanted. He said, I want all the firstborn that exits the womb. That's you and me in spiritual terms. That's what he wanted. And
Yeah,
he said he would give it to him.
I think the Sinai covenant tried to expand that, actually, because he wanted the whole nation to be a nation of priests. So at least all the males, anyway. And he probably was not disinterested in the females as well, but just the way society worked in those days. Yeah, he wanted everybody. He didn't want any group separated out.
Todd?
I think a lot of the problem can be cleared up if we start thinking about the wave chief offering and the what took place at the crucifixion of Christ. What happened? What did we see happen? Well, the veil was torn, right? The veil was torn, wasn't torn from the earthquake. It was torn by God and revealing what? The Holy of Holies, right? In other words, that's one thing you have to remember. The second thing is that on the first day, on the Sunday, actually, Christ tells Mary, don't cling to me because I have to go to my Father. Well, what is this happening? First of all, his death brought an end to the marriage covenant. Well, where was the marriage covenant taking place? On Mount Sinai, right in the beginning. That was the wedding agreement that they agreed to, right?
There could be debate about that. I think that personally, I think the Deuteronomy covenant is more like a wedding covenant, and because
Well,
he
the acceptance, when Israel accepted the initial agreement on that Pentecost, it was on a Pentecost day. That was a Pentecost day, and they accepted that agreement. And so that agreement was made null and void with the death of Christ.
Well, that agreement was destroyed actually with the golden calf for all practical purposes. It remained with Moses.
It wasn't destroyed. It would be like any marriage agreement that one of the partners doesn't commits adultery, right? The marriage isn't destroyed, it's badly damaged.
Yeah. Yeah, at least, yes.
Yeah, right. And so when we understand, if we understand that, the official ending occurred with the death of Christ and the tearing of the veil. That brought, and the acceptance of the Father, acceptance of Christ's sacrifice. And that was the acceptance of the wave sheaf offering. That was the fulfillment, in fact, of the Leviticus statement. When you come into the land, you will take a sheaf and wave it for acceptance, right? And so that was the wave sheaf offering. It was pure grain. It was a pure grain offering. And so at that point in time, you had the covenant it ended with Christ's death. That ended that covenant. And that ended actually that's when the Old Testament really comes to an end at that point. And it shows, it's very clear that with his death, that brings an end to it, to the marriage covenant.
Yeah, I think you'd be better to consider that the Deuteronomy covenant actually than the Sinai covenant. The Sinai covenant, I don't think is necessarily labeled as a marriage covenant, but in Jeremiah 31, it talks about I was a
now
husband.
wait a minute. You have to look at, as far as I see, that covenant, the initial covenant, was the marriage covenant. That's where Israel accepted all the regulations, and Christ accepted Israel as his wife, if you want to put it in those terms. And so that's when that covenant came to an end, with his death. So that should be really crystal clear. And there shouldn't be a problem with that.
Well, no, it's not really a problem, and it's not a super important point. But in Jeremiah 31, verse 32, we read part of this quoted in Hebrews. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That was mental Egypt that we're talking about here. My covenant, which they broke, though I was a husband to them.
Yeah, it makes it pretty clear there.
It was that Deuteronomy covenant that is being
When
talked about
did the question has to be answered? when did Christ make the marriage agreement?
Well,
What was the first agreement that Israel agreed to? And that actually Christ agreed to. You know, he said to Moses, take this down to the people and find out, see if they agree. If they agree, and then what do you have? You have Exodus.
well, you have two agreements, and so you have a choice, just like we had, when we looked at Hebrews before.
You really, I don't see I have a choice.
Yeah, well, but
the-
it is likely true that Yeshua's death was instrumental in the demise of the covenant that established the Levitical system.
Well, I guess that's pretty straightforward. And so when you understand that, and the new covenant actually hasn't been certified yet, has it? I mean,
Paul
in other
claimed
words,
he did.
until the marriage actually occurs, then you have in other words, you have what we might call like an engagement. In other words, if you're looking at the wedding arrangement, the father chooses the bride, right? And then a time elapses, and finally, the father says, "Okay, this is when we're going to have the marriage ceremony." Up until then, there is no ceremony, even though the bride has already been kind of picked out, you might say. The father picks out the bride, but the marriage ceremony hasn't occurred.
As I understand it, with Jewish weddings, the marriage is actually the signing of the contract, which is the betrothal.
But it doesn't come to fruition until the son takes the bride, actually, till the consummation.
Yeah.
And so that is this is what we're looking at. That consummation has not taken place yet.
Right, but Paul talks about wanting to present the church a chaste virgin. So
It fits
that's
perfect.
going to happen when Yeshua comes to get the bride.
Yeah, well, that's correct. And that is when that hasn't occurred yet,
Right.
right? Okay.
But
So
that
now
doesn't
you can
mean we
see
haven't made a
you can
commitment.
see how the death did away with the first marriage agreement
Okay.
when Christ and you also have the veil ripped, revealing the Holy of Holies. And so this is really an important difference, and it shows. If we look at the Jewish nation presently, they're still looking for the first coming of Christ, right? And that's what they're looking for, and so they think that they need the temple. They need to rebuild the temple. And this is something that is as far as the New Testament is concerned, is not necessary to have the temple worship. In fact, is actually in 70 AD, God destroyed the temple on purpose because the Jews at that time had returned to temple worship. And you can see that when you read Acts 21. That becomes really quite clear in Acts 21. What I'm saying here is actually, I'm just kind of making it a lot simpler understanding to what you presented. If you recognize this, you should. It's a much simpler answer to the information, which was accurate, that you presented about the covenants, but you have to recognize that that was the end, was the sacrifice. When he died, it was the end of the marriage with Israel.
Well, and traditional
Agreement.
Christianity would use that to say then that the Old Testament is of no value.
Was what?
Of no value.
I'm my hearing isn't the greatest, so I missed exactly what you were saying there.
Traditional Christianity would agree with you. The Old Testament is of no value.
No, I didn't say that the Old Testament. You're saying that. I didn't say that. All I said is the agreement was done away. That's what I said.
Well, yeah,
The marriage agreement. The marriage agreement was done away. So what I'm saying is this agreement, that doesn't when did that happen? You had all the information about Abraham and the sons, etc., etc. You have all that information that occurred before the marriage agreement. That wasn't set aside. That information is still valid today. The commandments were in effect from day one. If we don't understand that, we need to think it through a little better. If you realize that, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, when they were in effect immediately, as soon as God made Adam and Eve, the commandments, they were there.
Don?
Yes.
He didn't say that you said that. He said that mainstream or regular Christians may use some of what you said to support their argument. He didn't say that you said that. And we got our hands up too. So I think we got yes, that the groom is dead. No more wedding, no more marriage.
Right.
Jim?
Takes what it does, what I'm saying is it takes the mystery out of all of this. We're trying to straighten it all out. What is which and where does it go? And
right.
You just have to understand this. And it makes it quite clear. At least to me, makes it quite clear.
Right. That's right. That's correct. Jim?
Everett, good evening. I know there's been a lot of filibustering. I have one quick question and then a little longer one after that. You're familiar with the Ante-Nicene Fathers, and they basically said that the Torah was bad and given to Israel for punishment. That is the basis of mainstream Christianity today when they look at the Torah. And I think they would have a different view if they would say, well, the Torah is actually God's instructions for the good, and we may have to interpret it differently for individuals in the nation. Is that your general understanding? Because I think it is.
Their conduct was bad. It was given to them so that they could live and inherit the land. So yeah, it was intended to give life.
So that it was generally good. But again, you've read the Ante-Nicene Fathers, and they generally say that it was bad and given to Israel for punishment. And I disagree with that, and I believe you do as well, right?
Right. I don't really see it that way. It was a reaction. There are Jewish scholars that say that the imposition of the tabernacle was a reaction to their sin. If, you know, they don't call it punishment. I wouldn't call it punishment. No, it was done so that they could live in spite of that, in
Okay.
spite of their action.
And then the second point is just looking at covenants. I mean, yeah, you could say the first covenant that you look at is Genesis 3:15, you know, you step on the snake's head, but the first real one that I see is the Noahic covenant. But then you see the Abrahamic covenant that didn't negate the Noahic covenant. That was an addition. You then have what's the Mosaic or the Sinaitic covenant that didn't negate either one of the earlier two. It was an addition to it. You then have
There's a scripture, First Chronicles 16, about verse 15 through 18, that talks about his covenant with Abraham.
Yep.
It will last for 1,000 years. His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Israel. And we're told in Deuteronomy that he spoke his covenant at Sinai there in Exodus 20. That covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Israel was all the same covenant. It's his covenant. It's fundamental to his approach to everything. I suspect, well, the way it reads with Noah is talks about my covenant, God speaking, was given to Noah as well. So he was under the same, expectation, the same standards as everybody else.
okay, so my question on that is Deuteronomy 6, you know, the famous Shema. And we take a look at it in the Hebrew, and it basically says that Yahweh our Elohim is our one and only God, and we shall love him with all our heart, soul, might, however you want to go on with that. I see that covenant as being with the Father. And I think it's pretty explicit throughout, and that when Jesus quotes it and they ask what the two greatest commandments are, he also says to love the Father with all your heart, soul, and your being. So I hear this all the time with my evangelical friends, that yes, the most important thing is to serve the Lord Jesus Christ. And they ignore John 3:16 for God. And in context, it can only be the Father, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. I mean, it kind of defines who God is as the Father. So why wouldn't that covenant at Sinai be with Jehovah the Father, which is what I think it is?
Well, that is his covenant. That's very important to him. Yeah, if you will enter into life, keep the commandments. That's fundamental to his approach and dealings with everybody. And I that's kind of hinted at another reason why the Sinai covenant appears to me to be a covenant between as it's described in one person's book, a suzerain and his subjects.
I believe that totally, just so you know.
So yeah, it's much more like the Father, whereas the covenant with Deuteronomy is more like a husband that is taking over in that particular case. That's my way of thinking at this point in time anyway. That covenant is not going to go away. That's how Yah relates to everything.
And I just so you know, I'll let it go for me, when they always say the Torah, rather than saying instructions, which is what a dad teaches his kids, they want to say the law. Where if you would just say my instructions, then it's like, okay, here's the good things I want you to do because I'm your dad and you're my kids. And that kind of puts it more in context rather than being the law. And I have a tough time with all my evangelical friends on that. So thank you.
Thank you. One reason I think the covenant at Sinai is so short is because he expects us to think about it. He gives good examples of what kind of conduct he expects, and he expects us to ponder that and apply it. Unlike having a laundry list of do's and don'ts, and which invariably you'll get in a situation where your laundry list doesn't cover your situation, and you'll be ill-equipped to figure it out for yourself if you haven't spent the time to research and think and ponder what he's expecting in the instruction. That's why it's summarized.
So Everett, you would say that he'd be expecting us to grow our character, just like we want our sons and daughters to grow their character?
Shock of all shocks, huh? Yes.
Crystal's iPad.
Some statements were made and just let pass about the wedding, when the wedding's going to occur. If you go to Acts 2, it's quite clear the wedding's already occurred, or we'd be bastards, we'd be illegitimate children. But no, we are given the seed, which is the Holy Spirit, and we're fathered. We become the children. We're just in the womb. The big supper is going to be when he takes his wife, who's already married, home to see daddy. Get to meet the rest of the family. The wedding's already occurred. I don't go with this dispensational pile of stuff that Armstrong taught or a lot of other people taught. Go read Acts 2 itself. It says this is what was written in the book of Joel. You spin back to the book of Joel and it says this is the new covenant. Christ was quite clear. He said, this is a new covenant in my blood. Whoever eats this and drinks this, I give the power to become children of God. It's laid out there as plain as day that forever's already started. We're not waiting for forever. Forever's already started for you and me. It's going to last forever. He talked about Mary and to Martha. He said, if you just been here a couple of days earlier, Lazarus would have been okay. Oh, well, you'll raise him up in the last day. He said, no, I am the power of the life. If you believe me, even though you die, you shall live. You shall not die. Do you believe this? That was a direct question, because that was a direct question. Wasn't a question about you will be raised up in the last day. Will you ever really die? He addressed these questions quite clearly. In our belief system, we've not accepted them, but they're quite plain on the face. Go read Acts 2 and tell me what it says about the book of Joel. I'll let somebody read it and they can comment on it. Thank you.
Him?
Yes, from my, you let me know if I'm right or wrong on this, but my understanding is the agreement on Mount Sinai, when, after they were in the promised land and the children of Israel, he, split them up, 10 tribes to the north and the other tribes to the south. Israel went a whoring around and gave them a bill of divorcement. And from what I see, that made void the agreement at Mount Sinai. That's when they agreed, but that agreement became void when God gave them a bill of divorcement, decree of divorcement. And then when he died on the cross, it did away with the Deuteronomy covenant, which is all the laws of sacrificial laws and the Levitical priesthood, where we had to go to the priest. The high priest went in to atone once a year, and Christ died and was accepted by God when he ascended up, and he became our high priest continually. So to me, the 10 Commandments is forever, from the beginning of time to the end of time. Always be, and that's just how I see it. But I mean, they're just plain and simple anyway, but they're not burdensome.
John?
Yeah, maybe my understanding is a little different than some of you, as I get people there. I view the new covenant. I enter into the new covenant at resurrection. For two reasons why I say that. Number one, it says, and their sins and iniquities I will remember no more. Well, right now a list has been being kept, and we're going to have to answer even for any loose word even. And we'll all have to stand before the judgment seat. And secondly, it talks about every man. Well, it says, I'll just read it here. And they will not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord. They shall not, for they all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. Well, that time obviously isn't upon us at this point. And I think as another point where maybe I have a different understanding is the future wedding with the New Jerusalem coming down. My aim is to be a guest there and be with the apostles and John the Baptizer. John the Baptizer is called a friend of the groom. He's not called the bride. And also the 12 apostles and the people at that time, they asked him why they're not fasting. And Jesus Christ said to them, the wedding guests don't fast while the groom's with them. They're referred to as guests, and John the Baptizer is referred to as a friend of the groom. So I view, and who's all these people that are guests there in their clothing? I think and it talks about New Jerusalem being prepared and coming down. Well, if that's the case, maybe Roman religion would have to be right, that they're all up in heaven, right? So that's the points, where I've come to that understanding. And my goal, like I said, is to stand with the 12 apostles and John the Baptizer as guests at this wedding. There'll be spirit beings at that time, and they'll have to aid Christ in administrating this new Jerusalem, which will be an awesome job. And right now he's recruiting judges and everything else. And it's kind of scary when it says that many are called to the job search, but few are chosen. So Paul admonishes us to run to win, with that understanding in mind, that only a few are chosen. That's all I got.
Don? Don?
Yeah, I'd just like to clear up a certain point that was made about the when Christ, or when God said that he was going to divorce his wife. That doesn't bring the marriage to an end. What that brings is a relationship, an active relationship, to an end. The marriage cannot end until, and this is very clear if we go to Romans, it makes that very clear, until one of the parties dies. And it talks about the wife is not free to remarry until her initial husband is dead. If she remarries again, it's not a marriage. So you have to recognize that just because it said that he divorced her, in other words, Israel, he divorced Israel, doesn't mean that that marriage came to an end. It doesn't come to an end until the crucifixion, when Christ is killed. That's when the marriage comes to an end. So that's kind of an important point to keep in mind there, to understand. That's it.
Right. He even expanded on that when he was talking about expanding on the law. And he said, well, if it's so, why did you have the bill of divorcement? And he said, because of the hardness of your hearts and your attitude, I had to do that. That was not what it was meant to be. It was meant to be a permanent thing. It's very clear. What you say is right. Bill?
Yes, it was quoted what the Jews call the Shema, the bad translation in King James, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." Terrible translation. The Shema is Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. There's no is in there. Even one of the rabbis said it has, Charles Dorothy, in fact, and I discussed this with him years ago. He said even one of the rabbis has said should read, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God only." There's no is in there. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord only." And the problem with Israel is that they worship both Baal and Yahweh. And that was what Elijah, when he brought down fire from heaven, if you go back and read the Hebrew, Elijah said, if Baal is Elohim, serve him. And if Yahweh is Elohim, serve him. Elohim is a kind of being, which right now there's only Jesus and the Father. Jesus and the Father are the two God kind beings. But that's what confuses a lot of people, that bad translation of the Shema. But it should read, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God only," not Easter and Christmas and Halloween and all these other gods. But and then I want to go, since Don made the comment about divorce. Clearly, the law said if a man gives his wife a bill of divorcement, she can go and be another man's wife. If you read Isaiah 50 and Jeremiah 3, put them together, you will see that God put away Judah, but did not give her a bill of divorcement. But he says very clearly to Judah, "You saw what I did to your sister Israel. I put her away and gave her a bill of divorcement." There's amazing prophecy there. God divorced Israel, but not Judah. He divorced Israel and basically said, go ahead and have a different husband, a different God. Go ahead and have your gods of Christmas and Easter and and all that. Go ahead. I give you a divorce. You can go read it. Isaiah 50, Jeremiah 3. But he says to Judah, I didn't give you a divorce. I put you away because of your fornication. Where is the bill of your mother's divorcement? He didn't divorce Judah because his son is coming through that line. Anyway, that's very prophetic thing about the house of Israel and the house of Judah. But anyway, the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God only, is a difficult scripture for a lot of us. I'm done.
That's what I was trying to say, Bill Hillenbrenner, about the divorcement. It made the agreement void at Mount Sinai. And you can give a bill of divorcement for adultery, and that's exactly what Israel did. They were worshiping other gods, committing adultery, idolatry.
Well, adultery was punishable by death. If there was a man found no favor in him, his woman, he could put her away and give her a bill of divorcement. But adultery was death.
Adultery, does he get shot?
Yeah.
Well, that's what they were basically doing. They were messing with other men, gods, or whatever you want to call it.
Jim?
Everett, I'd like to get your opinion on what Bill said, because I wrote a paper a long time ago looking at Elijah there with the prophets of Baal. And I think he has that exactly right. And he says, if Baal be Elohim, then worship Baal. If Jehovah be Elohim, then worship Jehovah. And the people stood there and were like, huh? What? They're the same thing. What are you talking about? And that's their harmonization, synchronization, however you want to call it. How would you think, I believe that's absolutely what he was saying there. How do you think that fits into the perception of the covenant?
Yeah, because he says, how long do you halt between two opinions?
Right, and I really believe that they thought it was two different names for the same God. I think that's the crux of what it's trying to say. And Everett, if that's true, and I don't know if you believe it's true, but I do, how do you think that affects looking at the covenant?
Well, I'd have to think about that for a little while. Israel obviously didn't live up to the Deuteronomy covenant either. You know, they messed up the Sinai covenant. They messed up the Deuteronomy covenant. You know, I'd have to look at that again to try to get in their minds to figure out what they're thinking. You know, I don't know how creative I would be in that particular case. But obviously, Baal had a big influence, and it was not Yahweh, you know, or Yah. It was somebody, they did things differently, different priests, you know, different all kinds of things. So Israel was at least being led astray at that particular point in time, and Elisha was trying to bring them back. Yeah, I don't know that I can really, you know, talk about that particular aspect. I will say, as far as the Sinai covenant and the relationship with Israel, the way I see that, that relationship was broken with the golden calf. Obviously, well, chapter 32 of Exodus, verse 7, And yet the Eternal said to Moses, "Go, get down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves." Verse 10, "Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, that I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation." At that point in time, that conduct was not part of what Yah had agreed to at the Sinai covenant. He had agreed to protect them, and he was ready to destroy them. That relationship was trashed at that point in time. And so even though the Levites were a step down, at least there was a step there. There wasn't a cliff that Israel was being thrown over. But that relationship was not restored until the Deuteronomy covenant. The only covenant that they had, the only agreement, the terms under which they needed to live, was that Deuteronomy covenant at that point in time. At least that's the way I see it, you know. So for what that's worth, I mean, we read the scriptures and said, "This day you have become the people of your God." And that happened on the first day, the 11th month in the 40th year after they came out of Egypt. So that's all they had. You know, now how that fits these other scriptures, you know, I haven't necessarily looked at all of them. So, but hopefully something to think about.
Bill,
Yeah, if you look at Elijah there in 1 Kings 18:21, the King James read, and Elijah came unto the people and said, "How long halt you between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him." It's really interesting, you know, that word Lord, it's all in caps, it's Yahweh. If Yahweh be God, it's very interesting that and then the rest of it says, "But if Baal is, then follow him." The word Baal really means Lord. If you look at that word in the Hebrew, and even where it's used, Sarah says to Abraham as her Lord is Baal. And so the modern word Lord Jesus, to me, means the other Jesus that Paul talked about. If somebody comes preaching another Jesus, you know, one that says you don't have to keep the Sabbath and holy days and the commandments. And I know back in Worldwide, they didn't like to use the word Lord. They used eternal. And I kind of go along with that, because if you check the word Lord today, the Lord Jesus is really the other Jesus. I'm done.
any other comments or questions, anybody?
Oh, I would like to just make one comment about one of the corporate groups when I was visiting. A very person we probably would all know that have been worldwide made the interesting comment when he talked about that word Lord. The Greek is kurios, and he said it really shouldn't be Lord, it should be boss. That's what kurios really means. I go, wow, got it right for once.
Any other comments, questions? While everyone's thinking, tomorrow's word is miracle for the coffee clutch at 8 o'clock. Tagore.
Hey, Everett, have you done any presentations on New Covenant, what it means and what are the things in it?
Yes, I have.
Because I haven't heard you speak, at least to my knowledge, whenever we come across like this in Zoom sessions, you always press on the same subject.
Well,
It is a coincidence.
Of course, the reason I'm doing this again is because it's basically a different group than I would, had before. And I like to make sure people have a good foundation on the old covenant before we try to understand the new covenant. I did summarize it a little bit this evening, in that I think Christ's life are the terms of the new covenant. But
Okay, good to know that.
at
Thanks.
some point in time, given infinite time and patience, yeah, I would be happy to do that.
Okay. Thanks.
Bill?
I see your hand, Bill.
Okay, Galatians 3:19 was mentioned tonight, and that is very, very important. It was correctly explained in worldwide. Galatians 3:19, whosoever then wherefore then serves the law, it was added because of transgressions till the seed should come, to whom the promise was made. And I think we all understand that seed is Jesus Christ. It was added because of transgressions. The comment was made, I think many of us know this, the transgressions are transgressing the commandments. What was added was the burnt offerings. And the Galatians 4:10, when the heretics took over worldwide, I have the old, I have the thing that went to all the ministers, Pastor General's report. And one of the first things that the heretics brought up was Galatians 4:10, you observe days and months and times and years. And Herbert Armstrong tried to explain that, but he couldn't explain it correctly. Part of the reason was he didn't know Greek well enough, but I was in a class with some of the old guys might know, Charles Dorothy, and he said, hey, a student pointed out to me, he didn't even say I came up with it myself, that word observe in Galatians 4:10 in the Greek has a prefix on it. They are holy days, but it's the way they're observing it. And as I studied this early on and tried to teach it, it means you are scrupulously observing, or you are adding things to observing days, months, seasons, and years. Now, if you go back and get the whole Galatians, you realize this is where actually Paul goes before Peter, talking to him about you don't have to offer burnt offerings and be circumcised. The problem with Galatians, and even this was correctly taught, was the Jews that believed that Jesus was the Messiah were coming into the Galatians and saying, it's okay to keep the commandment. It's okay to believe in Christ, but if you want to be perfect, you have to get circumcised and offer burnt offerings. Once you understand that, it makes Galatians 3 so clear. Verse 1, oh, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Then Paul says, this would I learn of you, received you the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Did you receive the Holy Spirit by offering burnt offerings or by believing in Christ? And he says, are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, meaning you received God's Spirit, you believe Christ was your sacrifice, and are you now made perfect by the flesh? I have papers on this. I presented it way back 30 years ago to correct Galatians 4:10, that it is talking about holy days. This is one of the things, Galatians 4:10 is one of the things the Sunday keepers say, you don't have to keep the holy days. See, Paul said he was afraid because you were keeping them. No, that's totally wrong. it's a very esoteric section, Galatians 4. But if any of you are interested, I have the paper, went through this in detail, went through the Greek, what the elements of the law are. They're not stoic things but they're elements of the law. The elements of this world are the animals that come out of the ground. The grain offerings come out of the ground. Anyway, the Galatians 3:19 was mentioned, and it was correctly taught. Wherefore then, certain law was added, because as what was talked about earlier, the people sinned, and God said, I'm going to kill them all and wipe up and raise up Moses. Moses talked them out of it. What was added then is that whole secondary covenant, the Levites, burnt offerings, and all that was added because of transgressing the commandments. So if you want to go into this more, there's a lot of esoteric things there in Galatians 4, but took me a lot of study, and I appreciate you giving me the time to say it. But it's Christ is the sacrifice, as we all know. I'm done.
Jim?
So if anyone else is interested, Bill, just so you know, I have a complete disagreement with you. Charles Dorothy was a better scholar than either one of us. There's no doubt about that. But when you look at Colossians 2, and it talks about the new moons, Sabbath, and holy days, when it talks in Galatians 4:10, it uses completely different words. And it's talking about the Jews coming in and saying, not only must you be circumcised, but you must keep all of our Jewish holidays, like Hanukkah, like the observance of trees, like fasting on the Tuesday and Friday, so that if you really want to be holy, you must follow all Jewish tradition, even if they are outside of the Torah. So my interpretation, and I think that a lot of the other interpretations that I see are Galatians 4:10 is not talking about the holy days, because there is no doubt he's being derogatory. And if he's talking about the holy days, then that's a bad thing. Where you look at Colossians 2, he's saying, don't let anyone judge you to the Gentiles on keeping those things. So when you harmonize those, what days would he be talking about? Well, the Judaizers who came in and said, hey, it's perfectly okay to accept Jesus, but you're not really in covenant unless you be circumcised. To which Paul said, hey, you know what? If that's the case and you think cutting a little piece off, cut off the whole thing. I mean, he was pretty serious about that. And so in those contexts, of course, it would be these Jewish people saying, not only must you be circumcised, you must keep all of our holy days, even if they're not in the Torah. And it would be like sort of like telling an American, hey, you know what? We're French, so you must keep Bastille Day. And if you don't keep Bastille Day, then you're not really following God. That's what I think it's saying in there. And I think a number of other scholars are as well, who are being honest, like N.T. Wright and other people. I know the vast majority of Christian, quote unquote, mainstream scholars say, here's Paul saying that the holy days and the Sabbath are bad. No, he's saying the Jewish extra holidays, and they're saying if you don't keep these, you're not really holy and you're not really following God. And Paul's saying that's garbage.
Any other comments or questions about what was spoken tonight?
Sorry, Dom.
Everett looks like he's about to fall asleep. Bill?
Okay, so we're going back in my discussion with James here, but in Galatians 3, in verse 3, he says, are you now made perfect by flesh? Obviously, the works of the law. By the way, how do we know what the works of the law are? In recent months or so, I just realized Jesus said the priests profane the Sabbath and are found guiltless. What do they do that profanes the Sabbath? Offering, daily offerings on the Sabbath, offering a special offering for the Sabbath. It is a lot of work I have done goats, I've done deer, I've even done cattle with my dad in the old days. It's a lot of work to butcher an animal. So Christ shows the works of the law are the things that the priests had to do, but they profaned the Sabbath by that kind of work. But they're found guiltless because God said, okay, through Moses, do it. Now, what we are talking about in Galatians 4:10, let me tell you how the Sunday keepers have used the scriptures. If you look at Galatians 4:10, it says you observe the truth.
Can't hear you, Bill. You're not talking to the mic.
Okay, you're doing extra things, Galatians 4:10. You're doing extra things on days and months and times and years. If you go back to Numbers 28, this is what the Sunday keepers use. Oh, those are holy days. Why? Because in Numbers 28, it says the daily sacrifices, sacrifice on the Sabbath, sacrifice on the new moons, and sacrifice on the holy days. And so the Sunday keepers are going back and showing that they're not focusing on the sacrifice of animals. They're sacrificing on these are days, months, seasons, and years. That part they're correct about. What they're incorrect about, and what we haven't understood, is that these Jews were saying, hey, it's okay to believe in Christ, but if you want to be perfect, you have to offer burnt offerings. And that's what Paul is saying in verse 3, verse 1. Oh, foolish Galatians, who's bewitched you? He says in verse 3, are you made, oh, foolish, have you begun in the spirit? Are you now made perfect by flesh? I'm done.
Igor?
Yeah, I want to revisit Jeremiah 31:31 that you went through, Everett. I'll share my screen. Here it says, behold, the days come, said the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with house of Israel and with house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day I took them by hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, although I was a husband to them, said the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. For somehow Judah is left here in verse 33. Perhaps two sticks would be made one. After those days, said the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. But here, you interpreted here, verse 32, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by hand to bring them out of land of Egypt. So you said like he did not make any covenant with them in Egypt. I thought it is a little bit narrow interpretation. The day that I took them out of Egypt, like I always read that as a broader statement that includes all the covenants he made in between, starting from Egypt to the promised land. all the covenants bundled together. It's a holistic statement. I see the same thing in Leviticus 20, not Leviticus 26. I think Deuteronomy 26. At some point, I see like he discusses that in a broader journey from Egypt to the promised land. These are the things I have done for you, and you disappointed me. So the language seems to be much broader for me than a very narrow approach of the day they left Egypt. Anyways, we don't find any covenant that is made. So it cannot be in a narrow interpretation of that verse.
Well, it's a bigger interpretation. That's what basically Joshua 5 took it as the whole time they were wandering in the wilderness. They were still coming out of Egypt, but physically they had long been out of Egypt. So it was a mental condition. At least that's the logical way that I look at it. But it was a covenant that he made when he took them by the hand, basically, again. They were not his people. For the bulk of the time, they were wandering in the wilderness. They were Moses' people. I mean, Moses tried to dump them on God, but Yah was not accepting them. He had promised them that they would become his people, but they were not his people. They were Moses' people. And,
how could you say that?
well, Numbers
Disagreement
11.
with you.
Numbers 11, I think, illustrates that.
That's a major shift, what you are proposing. Are they following a man? Are they following that rock, which was Christ?
That, of course, is specifically referring to the early departure from Egypt. But in Numbers 11, verse 11, so Moses said to Eternal, why have you afflicted your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I beget them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, as a guardian carries a nursing child to the land which you swore to their fathers? And of course, we read in Deuteronomy a couple of places where it says, this day you have become the people of the Eternal. So, you know, Yah was always concerned about them. He had made a promise to the forefathers, to the patriarchs, and I think he wanted Moses to intercede. You know, he really didn't want to destroy them, but nevertheless, the record we have makes it seem pretty serious, and is easy to understand that he was about to destroy them. Psalms, I think 105 says pretty much the same thing. He would have destroyed them had not Moses stood in the breach. You know, so
That's true. Like
there was a definite division between them, a separation, and of course that was illustrated with the tribe of Levi around the tabernacle as well. So yeah, he's merciful, thankfully. And he wanted to bring them through. He bent his rules, if you will, his standards to allow Israel to live and go in and inherit the land.
So Moses, if they were, for example, hypothetically, if what you are saying is true, if they are Moses' people, there are non-stop miracles, 24/7. All through their journey, physically impossible for such such a mass of people to make it. There is no way for them to make it into the promised land without God with them. And I still can't reconcile to the statement that they are Moses people. I don't see, sorry. They are still God's people. They're covenanted people.
I think one thing is really humorous, Everett, is he says, did I beget all these people? He's a Levite. Who begat them? Abraham. In fact, Abraham even begat, Hagar was Egyptian. So some of those Egyptians that came out, many might have been Abraham. And so I think that's really funny. He goes, did I beget all these people? No, Abraham did.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I understand your perspective, Tagore. He was still sending manna, every day. Apparently the cloud, was still protecting them, especially when they traveled, maybe all the time. He was determined to bring them through. But they weren't living up to the standard that he wanted. And he put a separation between himself. He wanted the whole nation to be a nation of priests, but it wasn't going to work out. It wasn't going to happen. And he, developed a plan whereby they could still go in and inherit the land. Yes, he had, he had not followed through on his promise to destroy them. And he had to do a lot of things in order to, maintain them, but he still had a separation, and he was not going to live by his part of that bargain at Sinai because they had trashed it, so egregiously.
Yeah, that's true. The terms and conditions were violated. So he has no reason to be binding. Actually, he was binding to the terms and conditions of the covenant. He was faithfully binding. If you disobey, these such a things would happen. And we see exactly those things happen. The blessing script initially happened. Once they are disobeying, we see the curses script kicks in. What he tells exactly is happened to them eventually, either through Assyrians or through Babylon. All these things, series of judgments have come. But coming back to Jeremiah 31:31, we are now in Jeremiah chapter, book of Jeremiah. They are like, by that time, lots of history has happened. And at that point, God is still saying, even though I was a husband to you, implying until such time, until at least now, it is implied that he is still their husband. They are married people, spiritually married to Yahweh. So
Well, at that time they were, because the Deuteronomy covenant is the subject of Jeremiah 31:31. And that covenant was evidently was still in force, because it didn't require their death if they didn't obey. It allowed for their being sent into captivity and being placed under other authorities.
so that
was
at least
part of the deal.
At least that tells me that they are not Moses people.
Well, at that point in time, no, Moses was dead by that point in time. So yeah, they weren't his people. Yeah, when he was taken out of the line of authority, that covenant went into effect, and the high priest began to be the go-between. Now, for a while there, Yah continued to use Joshua. Joshua was told, I think in Deuteronomy 27 and maybe 31 as well, that he was going to have to consult the Urim and the Thummim. Well, there's no record of that happening. Yah continued to work with him, but officially, that would send him to the high priest to get his direction, you know. So that's the way it was officially supposed to work. For whatever reason, God didn't deem that necessary, or so. But that covenant was in effect at that time, and they become His people when it was confirmed.
Okay. Thank you.